Hello, Augies Worldwide. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, here with another episode of Ask Dave. This is an interesting one. Do you remember this radio right here? This is the radio that kind of started the Chinese radio craze. It's a Baofeng UV-5R Plus, and it has been much maligned and touted as a classical example of you get what you pay for. People have complained about how many spurious emissions it makes and so on. Well, Radioddity has come along with another radio that looks just like the UV-5R, acts just like the UV-5R, even has the 5R in its suffix, GT-5R. And we're going to look at this radio because this may be the new low-end radio for new hams that actually meets requirements. So let's take a look at the charts. So the big question, is the UV-5R finally fixed? Now, Radioddity says it is. They created a radio called the GT-5R. Let's take a look at it. This is the old radio, the UV-5R Plus. I got this a long time ago when the first Chinese radios were just starting to come up. The very first Chinese radio I got was the Oshing, spelled Wuxang, but pronounced Oshing, which is a nice little radio. This radio came out as much less expensive. It was half the price of the Oshing, about $25. Now here's the big lie. See that right there? It says on the box that it meets the Federal Communications Commission requirements. Well, it most certainly does not. So let's see what Radioddity has been doing. I have had a relationship with Radioddity now for several years. They first started as making radios that did DMR. And I think Baofeng makes their radios for them because they seem to have a pretty close connection between each other. But the first Baofeng efforts at DMR were not successful. They think they met the letter of the spec, but find out that specifications don't really contain absolutely everything that you need to know to do something. You need some experience in the field. Well, anyway, I used to work with a guy there who used the American nickname Keto, and now we have Kathy. And she said, we have a legal version of the UV-5R. And so I said, all right, send me one. And she did. And it's this one here, the GT-5R. And it's quite an interesting radio. And we're going to find out if it does meet the specs and whether it's a good radio. Now I asked her, I said, if it's legal, what's so good about it? And she said, now I'm going to help translate this a little bit here. This is a legal, meaning compliant version of the UV-5R. She says, the FCC and many hams claimed, I would put the word complained, that the frequencies and the spurious emissions do not meet the requirements of the FCC, which is absolutely true. And that's why we are now launching this 100% compliant version of the Baofeng, and this is the key term here, entry-level ham radio. It is an entry-level ham radio. Okay, the GT-5R, first thing she talks about here is it only transmits on the ham bands. And that is something I've been after the Chinese radio manufacturers for quite a while. Sell us a radio that only transmits on the ham bands, so we don't get weird things going on, crazy people getting on public service frequencies and so on. Hams can manage themselves, but when people start getting on other people's radio systems, it becomes a real problem, sometimes a problem of life and death. Now, she mentioned here 420 to 450, which is the American 70 centimeter band, but also it only goes from 144 to 148 megahertz on 2 meters, which is the, again, American 2-meter band. The European 2-meter band, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, only goes from 144 to 146. So in other words, what they have done here is make a radio for the American market. This is something very new from the Chinese. The Chinese have made world radios, radios they want to sell in any country on earth without having to do localization. This is the first instance that I know of where a mass purveyor of radios, and Baofeng certainly is that, has come up with an Americanized version or localized version of their radio. Now she says GT-5R spurious emissions meet FCC requirements and it will not obstruct other important services. They say, please see the attached test report. Well, as it turns out, I have a spectrum analyzer and we're going to look at it. And then here is a problem right off the bat. GT-5R complies with FCC equipment rules Part 15B and Part 90. Okay, so far so good. She gives 2 FCC IDs, one for the transmitter and one for the receiver. And it's the UV-5R. Please check the attached FCC certification. Notice that is not a certification from the FCC. This is the filing from Radioddity or Baofeng to the FCC. Now, you got a problem here. Baofeng has gotten in trouble before with the FCC for trying to create one radio, the UV-5R, and then creating at least, I think, 30 variations on it and keeping them all under the same compliance paperwork, even though they have different features, different firmware, and so on. That is a no-no, and that's why it's a no-no here. There should be one ID for the whole radio, covering both the transmitter and the receiver. But we'll let that go for a moment because I'm interested in the transmit part of it. The UV-5R and the receive is apparently the same thing. Now let's take a look at these boxes. This one over here on the left is the original UV-5R Plus box that I got so many years ago. It's been in my shack through several iterations. Here is the new box. Titch smaller, but same stuff inside. Note it does not come with the programming cable. Now I want you to look at this box for a minute. What does this conjure up? First, some wildly fantastical mountains, but it looks like something that you could take with you into the wilderness. Well, you certainly can if you're a ham. What I would like this box to say is GT-5R, either ham radio or amateur radio, and note in big letters, an amateur radio license is required, underlined, bolded, italicized, to use this radio. Okay, and that they should not be sold in places like truck stops and stuff like that. Okay. Well, let's take a look at the new radio. The new radio looks just like the old radio. It's got all the same keys here, okay? And yes, there's a flashlight on it, which is operated by this button down here, or if you hold this button down for a while, you get the reverse feature where you can listen on the transmit frequency. Up here has got the FM radio. It's got an FM radio just like before. It acts just like a UV-5R. I mean, really acts like it. It's got the same price, about $25. So here are the two next to each other. Now I note that the new one comes with a bit longer antenna. And I put both of them on the weather frequency. Here locally our NOAA weather is 162.450. Comes to us from Montrose Airport, which is about 20 miles north of us. And with this one here, if I hold the radio just right, I can hear it fairly well. This one here, it's much easier to get that signal. This is the new box. Now note right here, the FCC ID, the first 3 or 5, in this case 5, letters represent the manufacturer, and then the model number after it, UV-5R, they're trying to use that same old one again. But note what they say about the frequency, 144 to 148 and 420 to 450, which are the American ham bands. And down here, from Pofeng Electronics in Hong Kong, International, misspelled, group company, and then it's got an address in Hong Kong. Usually I get the Radioddity and other radios. There's a city, and I deeply apologize to the Chinese for not knowing their geography very well. But it's about 100 miles northwest of Hong Kong where these things come from. So I was a little surprised to see this Hong Kong address. Maybe it makes it a little easier for them to export. Now I want to compare the manuals. Here's the old manual down here. It's horrible. I hated that manual. I couldn't figure anything out. They have come, and I know Radioddity has come a long, long way in putting their manuals together, getting native English speakers to write these manuals. Much better manual. And they have the instructions in here for how to use Chirp to program the radio, which of course is not down here. You use Chirp, the UV-5R. That's the model. So it programs, everything does the same way. All the changes have been made in hardware. Now, here's the test instrument I have. I got this from Brad Rich, N6GR. It's a spectrum analyzer, and it goes from 0 hertz up to 1.5 gigahertz. Okay? And the way I got a sample, the problem with the sample over here, it says the max plus 20 dBm, which is 1/10 of a watt. So you can't really just run the radio right into it. So Brad also sent this along. This is a variable RF sampler. So you're not going to get the absolute value of things here, but you can get relative values. This right here, using the SO239s, is a straight through connector. Okay, you can put up to 2 kilowatts through there. Then there is a little knob here that you use to vary the attenuation, and then this thing, the BNC connector out, is what goes to the spectrum analyzer. Here you can see it with the different cables that I had attached to it. This goes out to the spectrum analyzer. If you're interested in this device, it's available from cleanrf.com. Here is the actual model, the RF-S2K. It's only $90, and it comes with a few cables down here. And this, of course, is my venerable, and I do mean venerable, Heathkit antenna that I put together when I was in my 20s. I just graduated from college, so it would have been 1975, I think. So it is only 45 years old, but it still works fine. It's a big resistor in mineral oil, immersed in mineral oil to dissipate the heat. One of the problems with this thing is that it's filled with mineral oil, and the mineral oil will seep. No matter how hard I push down that lid, it seeps. And it comes up onto the top here, so every so often I have to wipe off the layer of mineral oil. Okay, well, let's get to some results here. Okay, here is the UV-5R transmitting on, I think it's 146.52, which is right here. Okay, this is at -10 that it goes up to. Here is the second harmonic, third harmonic, fourth harmonic, fifth harmonic. And notice that the fourth harmonic is only 30 dB down from the fundamental. That just doesn't cut it. In addition, notice the overtones here. Here, here, and here we have overtones, which are in addition to the harmonics. So there's more distortion going on in here in addition to just creating harmonics. We've got overtones in here. Overtones are like, here's 2, 2.5. That's 2.5. That's 5/3, 5 halves overtone, the 7 halves overtone, and this would be the 9. This is the 11th. I mean, look at this. This is up here with the center frequency of 750 megahertz. It's still putting out a very measurable signal, okay? And it's just unacceptable, and always has been. Now, let's look at the new radio, which is, what did I do with it? Sorry, I got to look at it. The radio constitutes my notes. The GT-5R. Are you ready? Watch this. It's all gone. Look at the difference between the old and the new. The old and the new. All that junk went away, and we have just our one frequency here. Now, I did go in and, instead of making this 0 to 1.5 gigahertz, I made it 146 to 147 megahertz, just a megahertz wide, just to see what the thing would look like in there. And there weren't any spurious responses that I could really see in the noise down here, close in. It was all this far out crap. And so the new radio has cured that problem. Now let's go to 440. 440, we're getting a second harmonic, a third harmonic here. Okay, it's better. Second harmonic, third harmonic. Now let's look at this on the new radio. Boom. Nice and clean. Nice and clean. Okay, that is super. So what we have is a replacement for the UV-5R Plus, which has been the initial ham radio for an awful lot of hams. And you get what you pay for, I guess. But now they've got, for about the same price, a radio that, one, only transmits on the ham bands, does not transmit on police frequencies or federal frequencies or anything like that, and two, meets the spurious emission standards. Okay, major advances for that radio. Now, I will grant you, they need to get their paperwork in order. Okay, they've got a problem with their paperwork. They need paperwork that says GT-5R. Okay, now here is the red cable. I'm going to talk about programming this thing just a little bit. This is the red cable. The radios do not come with programming cables. Now, the red cable that comes from PowerWorks, and this is the one here, it says for Oshing radios, but it works beautifully with the Baofangs. It has the Kenwood style adapter here, and the chip in here is not that counterfeit prolific chip that a lot of the early programming cables had problems with. This one is a real, I think it's a Silicon Labs or something like that. And I plugged this into my computer here for the first time, and poof, it was just up, just like that. Okay, I'm Windows 10. The radio is, or the cable is plenty long. Note that it does say it supports Win 10. Oh well, can't spell everything in English right, I guess. Okay. They know a lot more English than I know Chinese, that's for sure. Okay, let's go into Chirp, because Baofeng uses Chirp to program all of its analog radios. Now, it does sell digital DMR radios, and you have to use the Radiodity software to program those. I have asked people, I know I asked the people at RF, whatever it was, that makes a competitor to Chirp, when are you going to add the digital radios? And I was getting a bunch of poo-poos, and I said, you're going to get left behind. You are going to be left behind. And now they do some of the D-Star. But Chirp is primarily, is all analog. So you put in the port, you know, you got to look at the, when you, let's go into system device manager here. Okay, here's device manager. I'm going to open ports, and that's a COM port that goes over to the radio. Now I'm going to insert the red cable in there, and I got, now this time it's COM4, okay, Silicon Labs. This is the red cable that you would use, okay. You got to kind of keep track of these things because as you move them in and out, they start swapping numbers, and they're not the same numbers every time you put them in, even though you use the same USB port, okay. So we go from here, and I've downloaded from the radio, following the usual instructions. Here are the memories. There are 128 memories. And you can do the usual things that you would do. Now, I was able with this software in the same session, download from the UV-5R into Chirp, and then upload from this into the GT-5R. The radios are that compatible, okay? So I downloaded all my stuff, which has got the nearby repeaters, the weather frequency up there, and so on, APRS, high and low power, packet low power, different things. By the way, I have used the UV-5R with APRS, and it works fine with that. Now, in the settings, I'm not going to go into detail in the settings, but you can see you've got all of these fields here where you can program just about anything. Now, let me make mention that I highly recommend trying to program the radio through the computer interface. It is so much easier to use Chirp than it is to try to program it through the front panel. And since they really didn't change anything in the UV-5R, it's got very similar firmware, I suspect it's going to be a little bit difficult. It can be done. I know people who've done it. I've never done it. But I've noted that I make note that a number of ARES or RACES groups require that their members demonstrate the ability to program in a new repeater on the fly. Because you might be in the middle of an incident, and so somebody rolls out a portable repeater. And so you've got to program that into your radio. And so, yes, you should learn that method for doing that, but it is so much easier to do it on board. So what have we got here? The same price, $27. Okay, now let's look at this. Baofeng upgraded legal walkie-talkies for adults. Okay, so these aren't FRS radios or for kids or anything like that. It finally gets around to saying ham radio down toward the bottom. Frankly, I think they need to put that up here in the first line. Baofeng upgraded amateur radio, and the word in America is handy-talkie, not walkie-talkie. Walkie-talkie is the phrase used in old American war movies from World War II for a walkie-talkie, which was something the size of a quart of milk. And these are much, much smaller, usually called handy-talkies. And now I will point out down here at the bottom, better choice for entry level. The next bullet says very clearly that a license is required to use this item. So I really appreciate that they do that. Okay, to summarize, I've taken the UV-5R and made the GT-5R, and this has a compliant transmitter. And it also will only transmit on the ham bands. Now you can still receive outside the ham bands, but it will not transmit outside the ham bands. And I have been advocating for that for years, that radios that we buy for ham radio should be ham radios and not something that you can use to interfere with somebody. There have been cases. There have been multiple cases of people using these things to interfere with police, fire, etc. And I did check that, by the way, I tried to transmit outside the ham bands with the dummy load, and so that it did not work on the new radio. I would love them to put on here amateur radio in the top, and amateur radio license required to buy, or something like that, for this. Now they're going to have to get their paperwork straightened out on how they do their FCC certifications. For each model radio, this is where UV-5R has had a problem in the past. They've had, like I said, probably 30 variations of this that they're trying to sell with the same original paperwork. And the FCC sent out a nastygram, said no. The FCC also said that it's illegal to use on the ham bands any radio that transmits outside the ham bands. There was a little ruckus about that. That radio, or that warning, has been completely ignored by World Plus Dog. But this one is actually compliant with that because it transmits only on the ham bands. So that's exciting. We've got an entry level, and I do mean entry level. I mean the voice quality, yada, yada, yada. You get what you pay for $27. It is a viable first radio that doesn't step on everything else or leave the opportunity for your kids to pick it up, twiddle the knobs. They hear somebody talking, so they try to talk back to them, and then shows up at the door your friendly policeman. So we've got something good here. I'm genuinely excited about this news. It's interesting that Radioddity is putting this out because Radioddity's name does not appear anywhere on here. Now, you program it using the UV-5R from Chirp. Kathy told me this morning in an email that they are going to be getting with the people who do Chirp, getting them the radio and so on, so the subtle differences between the radios can be addressed in its own suite of features inside of the ever reliable Chirp. So there you have it. It's kind of exciting, actually. I first presented these charts this morning to the Mike and Key Amateur Radio Club, which is up in the Seattle area, via Zoom, of course. Everything is via Zoom these days. Quite a great group, had great questions, and it was a real joy and an honor to present to them. So now I share it with you across the world, all Augies, patrons, subscribers, everybody. I would mention that if you desire to support this channel financially, you may do so by going to dcasler.com/support and by also subscribing and liking this video. And until we next meet, 73.